Good morning. I am Kevin Price. Delighted to be with you. Going to spend some time talking to you about you and your business. We got a great feature that we're doing here with Frank Granett. It's an ongoing series on the price of ADHD business. I think a great segment. In fact, it was Frank's idea in really talking about the fact that there's a lot of incentive to take routes that may not be in the best interest for patients. And we would like to explore alternatives. And I think it's very interesting because Frank Granett, who partners with us in doing this segment, is a pharmacist, but he's one who really likes to see caution. Frank, before you introduce our guest today, why don't you tell us about CAOOY and a little bit about your approach to treating things like ADHD?
Yeah, Kevin, great to be on again. And CAOOY stands for Coalition Against Over-Medicating Our Youth, and it's basically an assessment and a realization that there's many assessments out there that can be used and implemented before we go to that premature drug therapy, especially in our young child population, Kevin. And when we do that, we get some exciting stories across the country, and this not only affects our families across America, it affects businesses, and that's why business leaders across the country are now starting to realize, hey, let's get a different approach here and go after root cause analysis, especially in the young child population. And today, with autism, over 30% of all autism cases in our segment today, Kevin, have an ADHD component or coexistence to that. So it's very relevant, what's going on across the country to get people to realize underlying causation has to be done first before we go to premature drug therapy.
Let's jump to our guest real quick. Go ahead and introduce him for us.
Yeah, we have today, Kevin, an internationally regarded physician, Dr. John Cannell. He is the founder of the Vitamin D Council, and as far as his field and what he's done over the years is quite remarkable in the field of autism as far as causes, treatment, and prevention. And today we're going to be talking about vitamin D3 specifically. And Dr. John Cannell, welcome to our program.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Dr. Cannell, real quickly, kind of give us your elevator speech, if you will, a little bit about yourself and the work you're doing.
Well, the work I'm doing is mainly about vitamin D. And about 12 years ago, I realized a couple of facts about vitamin D. One is that activated vitamin D is a steroid hormone, which means that it works by turning your genes on and off, which is a really profound, dramatic mechanism of action. And then I also learned that when you go out in the sun for 30 minutes in your bathing suit in the summertime, you make about 10,000 units of vitamin D, which is about 20 times more than the government says you need. And I wondered why nature would make a mechanism that makes 20 times more than the government says you need. And so you have to end up either believing the government or believing nature. And I choose to believe nature. That is, I believe that the mechanism is there for a good reason. And so I started the Vitamin D Council, and for the last 12 years we've been trying to educate people about the importance of vitamin D.
Awesome.
For both the patients and healthcare providers.
Very good. Frank, your question?
And yeah, Dr. Cannell, if you could relate to our listeners, what would you say right now? We know autism now today across America reaches or afflicts 1 in 68 thereabout children nationwide, and it's the incidence is growing every year. What would you say right now? I know we're going to talk about vitamin D, but what is that contributing factor, if you will, with the cause of the onset of autism in our young child population? What would you say, or is it a overall toxin load exposure? What's your opinion on that?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. Of course, you're not old enough to remember, but our air and water is much cleaner now than it used to be in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
I mean, I was old enough to remember that I could see the air I was breathing. And that acid rain turned the lakes that I was swimming in crystal clear, and the rivers were on fire. So I think it's unlikely that it's a toxin unless it's a newly introduced one. We think that the environmental component of autism is vitamin D deficiency. Vitamin D levels in our children have been falling steadily for the last 30 years due to sun avoidance mainly. Also to video games, which keep children inside, And we think that the environmental component of autism is vitamin D deficiency.
Wow, that's interesting. That's very forward thinking, I would think. What's the medical community saying about that assessment?
Well, there's more and more researchers that are agreeing with me and are writing papers about vitamin D deficiency. There's more and more research being done into vitamin D deficiency and autism. Just recently, there was a paper published that showed that the prevalence of autism in the United States follows the pattern of the ultraviolet light that makes vitamin D, called UVB, the sunlight that makes it, and the less sunlight that you have in an area, the higher the rate of autism. And the incidence was about 3 times higher. That is, the places with the lowest amount of sunlight had 3 times more autism than the areas in the United States with the most sunlight. Mm-hmm. So those are the kind of research studies that are being done now.
Wow. Go ahead,
Dr.
Frank.
Cannell, on the vitamin D, because our listeners have to understand, there is a difference. Explain this where, what kind of vitamin D should I have myself or my child placed on for any type of condition, but more specifically autism. Explain the difference between vitamin D3 and D2 and the absorption, bioavailability, and why that's important as a consideration before they purchase anything like that.
Well, vitamin D3 is human vitamin D. That's the vitamin D that's made in the skin upon exposure to sunlight. Vitamin D2 is a vitamin D that the plant kingdom uses, and that is foreign to the metabolism of humans. And we think that humans should take human vitamin D, which is vitamin D3. Mm-hmm. There's also studies showing that vitamin D2 doesn't work as well in humans as vitamin D3.
Let me ask you.
It's vitamin D3 that people should get.
Let me ask you about, so someone who's already mature with autism, would vitamin D help them in that situation?
We don't know a mechanism by which that could occur, but just serendipitously, I've had patients who did respond, even though they're adults with ADHD, saying that many of the symptoms of adults with autism had their symptoms improved. So it's unclear what predicts a response to vitamin D if you have autism. The people that respond best are young children who are just developing the symptoms of autism, that is age 2 or 3. They seem to respond best to vitamin D.
Frank, we're getting near the time we have to wrap it up. In fact, we're past that time. Final thoughts?
Dr. Cannell, we appreciate your perspective on this for our listeners, and for more information, look for the next article on usdailyreview.com, and we're going to be featuring Dr. Cannell's interview, as well as going into these more assessments, including, the vitamin D3, and as far as other assessments to get kids back on track before we go to premature drug therapy.
Yeah, I like that. VitaminDcouncil.org. VitaminDcouncil.org. Meanwhile, learn more about Frank and the work we're doing together at CAOOY.org. That's CAOOY.org. Frank, good talking to you. Doctor, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me,
Doctor.
When we come back, much more for you. Do want to remind you, you're listening to The Price of Business, and the best content here shows up over there at usdailyreview.com, and I am Kevin Price.
Blinded by the light, wrapped up like a douche under the road.